We're going to cover contract lifecycle management and the contract and commercial module within the Brooklyn platform. This is going to cover contract onboarding, ingestion, storage, contract management, obligations, and AI capabilities that are embedded within those workflow and processes. But first we're going to cover the common status position we see with customers and partners, whereby they have some semblance of a contract database or a contract repository or just a simple contract spreadsheet that we need to onboard. Part of the implementation solution is that we go through those data sets, and what you see here is a typical set of headers that we're used to seeing inside of a contract database or contract spreadsheet. You'll see things like the supplier and service name, references, what the tier is of the supplier or the contract, what the type is, whether there's been any risk assessments, who the supplier manager is, and the accountable executive. We systematically go through these with the client and look at actually what out of those headings are just general details and metadata that needs to be captured. More often than not, and sometimes more importantly, what are hidden processes? As you can see here, the title of the column here was latest risk assessment, albeit that would have a date in. That is a whole different entire process that we can pick up using our third-party risk management module and rebuild and re-engineer that process to be able to feed into the contract at a later date. This sets us up to be able to extract what is metadata, what are compliance checks and thus processes, and what are processes or surveys that need to take place further down the line. The first part, what we do is re-engineer the metadata into a contractual overview that sits under the contract. In this case, we've gone to the contract studio and we've opened a consulting agreement, which is a contract under the BitTech organisation. You can see here the same headings that there are in the spreadsheet represented here, and the data that the customer is commonly familiar with looking at. They can also very quickly find out the tier, where they are in Lifecycle, what are the agreement types and the business units, as well as any custom tags. If I switch to the platform view now, you'll be able to see not only do we hold that data, we then can also trigger where the data is a bit out the norm of what we would expect. And these are called compliance rules. You'll see these banners or these numbers across the platform. These are designed to draw your attention to the fact that there is either something wrong with the contract end date, that it's out of line, that there's data missing, and you can then correct these. So this contract overview, as stated, was just a few bits of data that has been found. You can go to the contract profile, which has many more fields that can be populated out of the box, as well as custom fields that be configured around anything from people to currency to addresses and anything that's required to capture at a business level. This here shows a contract that's been processed using the platform. So to show you this in the platform back using the same agreement, what we would have done is come in here, onboarded a contract. When we onboarded a contract, we'd have selected BitTech to be the organisation. We then would have given the contract a name, the agreement types, etc. But then from here, we'd have clicked here to add the contract itself. Once we had the contract itself, it was then processed through the onboarding engine. Once that process is complete, we would have received an alert under this bell option here to notify you of the completion. That would then link you to this tab here, in which case you'll be able to see all the documents, not just a single contract, multiple documents that make up the whole contract here, and the clauses that they represent extracted accordingly. For example, if I click here on this clause 2.1, you'll be able to see within the document, enabling the highlight, where 2.1 is in this agreement. What you can also do, again, like I said, it's multi-document aware. So in this case, it's had a number of contracts scanned. It's had a change notice scanned in as well, and all of them are being viewed at the same time. And from a sections and topics perspective, what we can do then is look for things of interest. So in this case, standard things that you might do Control F for or find for in a PDF that you're interested in looking at. In this case, if we look at termination, so termination has been a topic that's been found and located within the contract. As you can see here, 34 clauses have been found that represent termination. Now you can look at these individually and look at the agreement and where they exist and those clauses, etc. What you can do simply is either get an explanation from the AI module by clicking this button about this particular clause itself. So the AI engine will tell you what it thinks this clause means in the context of it. And if you wanted to do anything with that finding, you can turn it into a process, create it as an action or create it as a risk, or just copy the message out for use elsewhere. Probably more usefully is that if you're looking at these 34 clauses across multiple documents and multiple pages, that you actually get all 34 analysed by our large language model and Ask Brooklyn agent. And what it will come back to and do is give you a determination of what you think or what the termination clauses are across the entire contract and how you can terminate. Here from either party can terminate, written notice, periods of time, any conflict of information, the organisations that are in context, and it gives you a confidence rating. From here, if you was then considering terminating this agreement, what you could do was set up a contract termination process to kick off and take you through that, which would allow you to then capture meetings, minutes, any risks against that actual contract termination event. Outside of this, you can just simply save it as a note so it's there and available for recall later. So you can see here there's been 4 notes generated against that over time, and you can recall those notes at any point in time that you want to look at it. What can also be done at a contract level is, if these are standard terms that are in the system that are being searched for and found, so contract obligations, all obligations, deliverables, customer responsibility, periods of time. You can look at anything from there's 12 dates been found in here, person's name has been found. Sometimes you're going to look for something you didn't know that you wanted to find, so it's not necessarily going to be in this list that's been created. You can just do chat to my contract, in which case you can look at starting a new chat, essentially around looking at all of the clauses that are across all the documents. In this case, there's 776 clauses. In this case, this has already been found, but just as an example. So in this case, you ask, what are the listed deliverables of the agreement? It goes away. Bear in mind, it's reading several dozen pages. What you can see here is it's come back with the deliverables, a bit about the program, how they're split into 4 phases. And again, same, you can share this information, save it as a note, copy it, or create an event, be it a workflow, an action, or a risk off the back of this. Where you can see this sign, this means a workflow has already been created automatically based on the settings that there are in the configuration. So in some organisations, they require that the obligations are automatically created from the contract scan. Other customers require to go in and do this manually because they might want to manage the obligations at a sort of collective level. So like all deliverables together, even if there was 15 deliverables, they want to manage that as one obligation rather than 15. In this case, this has been an automatic extraction of an obligation, and you can see it's being moved to a workflow. You can see all of those workflows at the top of the contract by switching to obligations, in which case 97 obligations were automatically extracted from this contract to then be managed as necessary by the contract manager. Each of these obligations can then be looked at separately. They can be set up as templates and walked through in a set manner. You can see all the obligation details, the clause text, the page it was on. You can recall the page in the agreement where that obligation can be found. Again, it makes it into a true case management system. So not only do you have the obligations details, you can then capture the people involved, any additional files that are required. You can take actions against the obligations, log risks against that specific obligation, have meetings about it, and many, many other capabilities and events that you can drive from a standard obligation. Contract compliance landscape is a way of looking at all your contracts in a graphical format. So in this case, what's being looked at here is your tier 1 contracts, and under contract demographics, which was a section, remember what we just showed you on the left of where there's the sections and topics that were located in the contracts. These can be looked at per section. So in this case, it's contract demographics, start date, end date being found. The green indicates that it was found and he's confident that it found it. The yellow is where it's not so confident, and the red is where it hasn't found it. So in this case of the city here, if I went over this information button, you'll see that it gives you a topic guidance as to what it's looking for and why it's looking for it and why it matters. On that basis, you can then click directly on the yellow tag here. The confidence is 25%, and it says, I think I found a city, and you can look at it. It says Unitech Cloud Limited, whose registered principal office is at London. Yeah, that's found the address. So you basically click that to comply, and that would then go green and show you that it's found that. You can create these settings in this to automatically go green. So if you wanted, rather than having the burden of going in and deciding, you can set the tolerance to be a lower percentile confidence. So if it's got a lower percentile, it automatically create it green. As you can see, there's a lot of green here. There's some contracts that just don't hold the data that's required. We can interrogate contract stock quite easily. Quite a common use case is that you've got a number of contracts. Something happens either geographically, sort of civil unrest in a certain location, or there will be a change in legislation or requirement to say, do we have certain types of clauses in these contracts? What you can do is then, if you haven't got a config already for it, like I showed you with termination rights, which was already in there and included, it might be something new. We can then basically set up a search item, in which case this is sub-processor clauses. We can then push those through all the documents. So of the 462 items here, you can see we can refresh and look and push those new search criteria through all of the contract stock. You can then, after a period of time, normally takes 15, depending how many contracts you've got, 15 to 45 minutes to run, and then you can go back and go into this dashboard and look at what's been found for those search criteria, how many contracts have it, how many contracts think they have it, and then you can get down to the single contracts through clicking to say, does it actually have it, and is it there, and that's what you need to see from a sub-processor's perspective. You can see here that that's been pushed now into the config sub-processor. As I found sub-processor, it thinks it's found, it's a bit small, but 7 clauses that relate to sub-processing. From an onboarding perspective, you'll see that from the look and feel you saw here from this view, all the menu items you've got and all the options, etc. We can offer self-onboarding by suppliers. You notice this is less busy, so when a supplier gets it for self-onboarding, all they can do is add an onboard an organisation or a contract. The email that they would have received tells them how to go about it. They'll onboard their organisation. In this case here, it's Astute Consulting. If they want to add a logo, they can. They go from there into organisation studio, in which case they can only see one because they're only allowed to see their own one. They can then update their organisation profile, relevant information, so things, DUNS numbers, corporate registration numbers. That then means that the system can find it and then update that information from those various system APIs, so you can have less metadata to populate if you just use the recognised DUNS numbers or LEI numbers. They can then go to the contracts tab, as I've done here, onboard a contract. They can onboard that contract I showed you earlier and then process that through the smart onboarding engine. They can also then receive notifications when there's information that they need to be populating. So in this case, business owner empty, you'll be able to go to the contract and then populate that information accordingly.